Welcome to the Measure Success podcast, where we talk with top leaders about effective strategies that inspire success. Just want to say thank you once again that we have become the fourth best strategic planning podcast out there. Just still shocked and surprised. I mean, honestly, when we started this a long time ago, I don't think we saw that coming. Maybe top 100 would be an awesome goal, but to be recently recognized as that, we're thank you. So thank you everyone in the audience for making this happen. And secondly, just a reminder, our 40 strategy growth workshop, that is the place to be to help meet with experts and see what's happening in the marketplace. This is no time. Klee today, our guest, is going to talk about how much change is happening. If you aren't staying on top of the tsunami, you will get buried by the tsunami. Speaking of Klee Kleber is a co-founder and partner at Build Group. It's an Austin-based investment firm that takes an operator-led, hands-on approach to helping early growth software companies scale. Prior to Build Group, he held leadership roles at Rackspace, WP Engine, and learned, he'll have a good story here I'll talk about later about being at Dell in Japan, where he has also led marketing, product developing, and go-to-market strategy. He has a background in economics, an MBA from Wharton, and he also brings decades of experience in brand building, strategy growth, and operational execution, which basically means we're both old. He's an active board member and nonprofit leader, including roles with KUT Public Media and the PKD Foundation. Klee, welcome to the Measure Success podcast.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Okay. So for those who didn't get what your company does, let's start with that first. What do you do?
Well, so Build Group exists in the venture capital category, if you will. We started it back in 2018. That's when we raised our, kind of initial fund. And we wanted to do things a little bit differently. So we didn't just want to be a standard VC fund where, if you look at the way the model often works, you make a whole bunch of investments, almost too many to keep up with. It's called power law investing. And eventually one of those, maybe 1 out of 50, is like this kind of home run investment. And the rate of return of your fund is defined by that winner. And everything else kind of doesn't matter that much. We weren't happy with that kind of model, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, so feel free to criticize. But we tried to build a VC firm or an investment firm that was more like a company that was focused on building. All of us are kind of former operators, and so we've had functions in marketing and product. And Lanham, one of our guys, was the CEO of Rackspace, so we have some scar tissue and some history building companies and dealing with the ups and downs of that process. So we wanted to be able to help the companies that we invested in, the leadership teams that we invested in. We wanted to help them, kind of build a company successfully, maybe avoid some of the pitfalls that we had encountered on, when we built Rackspace and Dell and the other companies we were a part of. So that was kind of our initial thought. And we did a few other things. We tried to make it where we don't have a defined exit date for investments, so we can hold as long as we need until there's a good opportunity to sell. It also allows us to invest deeply in strategic opportunities that take a long time to mature. So we've tried to do it differently. Some parts worked, some parts didn't, but yeah, we've had a good run. And I think our results now, pretty much top decile on what's called DPI for a 2018 fund.
Well, I love the different approach that you did. I think I love the initial comment you made that 1 in 50, all you need is to be a unicorn, so to speak, right? To get the fund to be successful. And I agree with you. I think that's just honestly a waste, right? Of really good ideas, but that obviously they haven't had the right people, process, and systems around that great idea to execute it, to ultimately scale it. Right. As you know, most people who are in VC and PE, and I work with these people and they're brilliant, right? A lot of people like you come from Wharton. They come from some of the best finance colleges in the nation, but they aren't necessarily operators.
Mm-hmm. Right.
They know how to make money, right? And there's great to make as a GP, right? And a PE fund. If you can raise money and you can turn it into something, but running a company is very, very different. And secondly, I love the concept too that you also talked about is you don't necessarily have an end date. You wait till you can maximize effectively what it's worth, through that process behind it. So I'm curious for you as you're working with these founders and they come in with you, because I kind of imagine they have this reluctant expectation that you're like everybody else. How do you get them to overcome that, or that they're like, hey, you're going to be comfortable. Everything's going to be fine. We actually are in this for quote unquote the long run.
Well, I think, so if you think of sourcing as a go-to-market, kind of operation. So when you do sourcing, you're doing, you're trying to build awareness of your VC firm and you're trying to get the interest of the really good, opportunities, the good founders, the good platforms. And so part of it is positioning and, kind of marketing. But where we really differentiate, I think when we're in a discussion with a founding team, we don't treat them as like, here's how cool we are and here's our background and blah, blah, blah. We just make it a whiteboard exercise about their business. So it's like a consulting engagement, for an hour or two. So we'll go visit a founding team in person, over the phone or over a VC works great too. But we try to get there in person, get up on a whiteboard and just work through business problems. And so that like at the end of that, then we talk about, well, investment opportunity and potential valuation and things like that. But 80, 90% of it, we want to be like a value add. So if we leave and we don't invest in them, at least we've like helped them out a little bit. And frankly, it's just a lot more fun. I mean, like I say, we're former operators. The deal stuff, the deal execution side and all the negotiations and everything, I wouldn't say those are our favorite things to do. They're kind of like a necessary evil for us to be able to get in and help these companies. But mostly we're business nerds and we just want to get in and help, kind of build the company. So, that's that. And once we do that, I can't count how many times we've heard at the end of a meeting, this was so unlike every other meeting I've had that, I'm really interested in you guys. So it doesn't always work out. A lot of times there's, other terms and issues that, don't allow the deal to go forward. But at the end of the day, we use the net promoter system at Rackspace. We want to do the same thing at Bill Group. It's like, we want to have a high NPS score among the companies that we talk.
Yeah. So curious, do you measure that? Do you measure NPS there?
We talked about it. We haven't gotten to that point, but I think it's a good idea.
Well, I think, once again, when you have the amount of positive exits that you've had, and you mentioned the overall long-term health of it, that's truly how you measure success, right? At the firm.
Yeah, I think, no matter what, I mean, we're still an investment firm. We have LPs. We have a, primary responsibility there. But I don't know, I mean, I know Lanham lives this. Every time he meets someone, he wants to make their life better. Like, and it sounds corny and, kind of trite or whatever, but that's actually how he operates. And so he's been inspirational for all of us, but we're together with each other. We've known each other for decades. We all have similar values in that way. And man, life's short. Like, why, don't be a jerk. Just let's try to build something.
So we have to go here, of course. And it feels like every podcast is AI, but we were joking because, of course, I use GPT to pull up your bio. Well, why would I hire somebody anymore to do that? Which I used to. I used to spend time. Now in 12 seconds, I got multiple questions. I usually don't use questions, but I could get my bio really quickly, right? And understand who you are in a very brief period of time. And especially when like today, I have 3 podcasts I'm recording. I have multiple other meetings in between. This isn't my only job, folks. I actually, right. And so, you have to, and this is why I love it, is you could pull up information so quickly. I want to go on something you were mentioning beforehand. I believe you said it was Lanham, but perhaps there was somebody else. And you mentioned a comment where they were being interviewed by somebody who was hiring for MBA, and they said, don't get an MBA anymore, right? That's big picture. Why? Now that's a first of all, scary as anything for anybody who's selling MBAs, right, in business schools. But why is this true? Why is that potentially a true risk for all of us who are experts, and now our expertise can be found in less than 2 seconds?
Well, it was at a Wharton conference, but it was Vino Kozla. So
okay, thank you. Thank you. Right name there.
But and sometimes he says things I think just to be provocative. But I actually agree with this statement. I mean, he's an AI bull, but I agree. He says that his opinion is that the marginal cost of expertise is going to be zero, meaning that you can get access to the best ideas, the best know-how, the best historical knowledge on any range of topics for, the cost of the GPT, search and run. So it's $1, $5, whatever. I mean, it's effectively zero. And his example was he was in, the neurologist's office. He had had all these tests done. He loaded his test into ChatGPT. I think he has access to like an advanced version, and it spit back results for him that when the neurologist came in and gave him his diagnosis and treatment plan, it was the same. So he's like, why am I paying this guy, $10,000 to come in and tell me this if I can get it for free with ChatGPT? And I was at the doctor this morning, kind of did the same thing, inspired by that conversation. So if you think about it, you go to school, you go to undergrad or grad school or whatever, and you fill your brain with knowledge that is basically now free, available to everybody, right? So what is the differentiation that we're going to have as a human? And I said earlier to you, there's way more that I don't know than I do. I mean, it's going to be hard to predict what's going to happen in the future, but for sure, if you try to differentiate yourself or predicate your success solely on just the amount of facts you can stuff into your brain or models or strategic frameworks or whatever, that is not going to be sufficient. So what's required for success in the future is going to be understanding the human side. Now that can take any number of forms, telling a good story and connecting in a human way with your customers. If you're running a business, if you're leading a large group of people, they have to kind of believe in you and want to follow you and your team leading a company forward or a nonprofit organization or whatever it might be. So there's people leadership that's required. There's an interesting idea out there. It's called Moravec's paradox. It was from, I think, like the 1960s, early AI research. It basically says that what AI is good at, what a machine is good at, is kind of things that are hard for humans, and then vice versa. Things that are easy for humans are harder for machines. So the easy example is you take a human and you say, hey, walk across this room full of, kindergartners. We can handle that. Kids are running around, whatever. We can handle it because a million years of evolution, we've learned how to navigate physical space. Not that hard for us. Machines have a hard time with that. They're getting better. We're on the cusp of some really good robotics tech, I think. But for the longest while, they just can't handle physical space that well. On the other hand, if you show a panel of numbers to a human and say, find the pattern, we can't find the pattern. A machine can do it almost instantly. So we only learned how to do statistics over the last few hundred years, industrial revolution. A lot of what we think of as knowledge is a fairly thin layer on top of, the sort of monkeys that we are. Right. But machines are really good at that. Guess what? AI is taking all that stuff away, like all the last 300 or 400 years of knowledge. And what we're left with is people, physical space, leadership, social connections. These are the things that humans still kind of own. Now, look, who knows, man? Maybe we won't own that in 10 years, but right now anyway, I think our job is to harness the knowledge that now has a marginal cost of zero in new and exciting ways to deliver value in whatever you're doing. If you're a company, it's better product, better customer engagement. If you're a nonprofit, serving your constituency, government, better handling, serving your citizens, you name it. If you're a criminal, it's going to empower them to do bad things, more quickly. But we got to figure out the human side. And I don't know everything that means, but if you're running a company, you better be really aggressive about commoditizing knowledge in your company and figuring out how to do the next thing. So whatever it ends up being, like I said, I have a theory.
Well, I think it's actually just to put an explanation point on what you just said. I believe it was McKinsey's consulting, right? Which of course is, as they used to say in the old days, nobody ever got fired for hiring McKinsey.
Mm-hmm.
The CEO just came out and said, their AI is an existential threat to who they are. And now the irony is 40% of their business is AI. That's the kind of funny part.
Right.
But they're like, no, the reality is something where we might have 12 people on a team. We might only need 3 to 4, right? The direction where things are going, because like it's interesting that there's like these comparisons, and we do consulting work here, right? For small business. Well, for the larger businesses that are in M&A, et cetera, or a Fortune 500 company, they want, right, this really high depth analysis that only a firm like McKinsey could do. Well, now that's so much easier to do. And the real problem, as you know, is none of this, well, let me clarify, 80% of it never gets implemented.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that to me is the core, in my opinion. This is my humble opinion. And I think you nailed it on it. Learning how to help humans ride the tsunami and implement the change as quick as they can to survive.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And, I do agree. Like McKinsey, I come from a, go-to-market background, ad agency. I mean, there's so many of like expertise vendors in the world that are, like, I agree with you. Their business model is really, in trouble, if you will. But, so I think of go-to-market, like trying to get growth to work in a company, like, is that function going to get replaced by AI? All the constituent parts, I think they will. The orchestration layer, which is both human and machine and kind of dealing with all the go-to-market activity, that I think is going to take a while before it's, fully run by machines. The analogy I always use is marketing and growth in a company is like offense and football. You've got to successfully, snap the ball to the quarterback, provide protection, hand it off successfully, or throw it. Receiver has to catch it. There's got to be some blocking. All these things have to happen in order to gain yards. And all the defense has to do is break up any one of those activities. So go to market is kind of the same. You've got to have a good product, priced right, communicated well. You got a sales team knows what they're doing. You have a target, ICP that you want to go after. You got to get the storytelling right. There's a dozen things or more that you have to get done in symphony together to get growth to happen. And if you screw up any one of those, if defense comes in and knocks anyone, then the whole chain doesn't work. And that level of activity, that orchestration, I think is still, for a while anyway, going to be a human endeavor. And even if that does get, kind of AI takes that over, there's still always going to be the human element. Like, I just think it's going to be, required to that. Like, sales is optional. Customers don't have to talk to a salesperson. So you got to have, that's got to be a perfect process. And so probably at some point you're going to need humans or something very human-like to engage with customers to get that to work. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Whenever you have, high trust exchange, right, of information or higher price type items, that's typically right where there is somebody human is still needed for the confidence, right, to part money from their wallet, right, in the day.
Yeah.
And are they going to end up changing and make it? But you know what? When I think of, once again, when we work with companies, there's never a shortage of great ideas. There never has been, and there never will
Yeah.
be. Uh, and now today it's easier to a great example. We work with clients on developing weekly sprints to execute their implementation plan. And we were literally doing our internal stuff. I was working with a client the other day, literally same day. And I'm like, hey, we're just going to throw this in ChatGPT, the project plan. The hardest thing is figuring out the first step. And when you can so much faster figure out the first step so you can move forward, right, to action, it's super powerful. This is like, once again, the value, but you still, of course, have to make sure it happens because we want to go back to what we're comfortable with and doing, like going back to the monkey
Yeah.
brain, right? We want
Yeah.
to go back to what we feel comfortable with. So I'm curious for you, when you are here, you are working with leading edge companies. What trends are you seeing with the companies that you're working with that are releasing products 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? Like, what type of results are we going to see that we can't see today?
Well, I think, so this is underlying this question is I think an interesting dynamic, which is AI going to replace what we already do, or is it going to allow us to do something different? I think it's the latter, of course. But the first implementation almost everywhere is to have it do something we already do. Have AI help you auto-complete code that you're writing, or have AI replace an SDR on the sales side, or have AI help you write something or whatever. But it's still slotting an AI in for a human-like job, which I think is, I mean, look, when television was first invented, they just put plays on TV, right? So, it was kind of the same things happening now, but how can you rewire it? And so if you think about like product development, I mean, and again, like I said before, I could be totally wrong, but I think there's an interesting opportunity for there to be a more almost Darwinian approach to product development. So rather than having a product plan and a set of sprints and kind of a direction you want to go, I mean, look, DevOps helps you make things get done in like little smaller iterative sprints versus one big long waterfall process. But what if you had thousands of DevOps processes running simultaneously, being live tested against your customer base and prospect base, and made the best kind of like auto-generated product win? And so rather than it be a fairly tops down human directed kind of thing, it's more of just like, hey man, let's see what actually works for people. And so then, it's like, what is the job of a product manager? It's like running that process, figuring out when there's signal, and then just, attacking the things that seem to work best. And you can imagine that being applied to medicine. In so many places, you could apply that same logic. Like treating diseases is incredibly complicated, and it's so slow to test all the compounds and test all the chemical pathways and everything else. What if you just had machines running, iterating, churning, and spitting out the best answers? You think we've had, sort of exponential progression of, kind of technology over the last few decades. I mean, we haven't seen anything yet, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I just feel, or you have, maybe it's not what wins. Maybe it's just everybody gets their own product, if it's a virtual product like software.
I literally had somebody share with me the other day of how it was a doctor actually saying how they came up with a specific, unique compound for a person to solve their specific medical problem, right?
Yeah,
And on that
exactly.
side, there's a company out of Vancouver that's doing this. And
Mhm.
this is the future, right? Of where, especially for these, that is one thing. But the other thing you said, I think is super valuable. And one of the person who runs the Paul Allen Institute, of where they have the largest, I think, group of PhDs
Mhm.
doing AI development. His key thing, which was surprising to me, he said, it's what you just said. He said, the ability to test the market as fast as possible with these ideas is frankly the best thing that we can do, because you don't know, like, how it is. It's always easy when you're looking at yourself saying, oh, this is a great idea. But until you
Mhm.
say it out loud or until you present it to somebody, is it really valuable? And to quickly iterate this,
Yeah.
present it to the market and see if it works. Nothing's better than that.
It's amazing. And the analogy from my own history, when I was at Dell, we were competing against all these companies. This is back in the 90s, that sold through channels, right? And we sold direct, eventually e-commerce. Well, I could run a promotion or launch a new product at 8 a.m. in the morning, and by noon, I knew if it was going to work or not. And I could call up the supply chain guys and say, hey, buy all the rest of those video cards. They're selling like hotcakes. By the time Compaq or anybody else figured out what was happening, it was weeks later, and we had already bought all the inventory. So we weren't smarter than Compaq or anyone else that Dell kind of drove out of business. Well, maybe I like to think we were a little smarter, but we probably weren't smarter, right? We just had better access to signal and information. And so imagine that, like, that was just a small example, but that was an industry that model fundamentally changed that industry, that insight into information. We shared it back with our supply chain, et cetera. Well, I mean, that's like just getting started. I mean, imagine what can happen now. And it's almost too much for humans to digest, but I think the best companies will be the ones that like attack these opportunities. If you're thinking about your own career, get after this. This is the opportunity. This is what I coach my kids.
Yeah, good for you. And I think you can even take this like a step further, right? Which is like, who would ever thought back in the day when you were at Dell that all of a sudden plumbing would be cool from
Right.
an investment standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Because why? That's the least likely things that we're going to be able to use AI to solve, right? We still need somebody to figure out. We might be able to mechanically help things out, but at the end of the day, a pipe has to be a pipe, and
Right.
we have well water, and we had to change the pump, and they did it in 4 hours, which I was super impressed with. Again, this big crane, it comes in and goes through it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
super amazing. At the end of the day, that skill, that talent, still has to happen. And so it's exciting. But what I have been trying to share to these same companies or organizations, let's say you're an HVAC company or a roofing company. Matter of fact, I'm aware of a roofing company down in Texas who I believe went on to sell. I didn't talk to him as after part, but
Yeah.
he was getting a 20 time, a PE, basically multiple. Why? Because when you looked up things on the internet, they were the only people in town,
Mm,
right? They
mm.
had learned marketing. They had learned
Yeah.
content
Yeah.
strategy.
Okay.
They had
Yeah. Yeah.
learned how to
Yeah.
get information out. And so
Right.
they were the only perceived players in town, and
Yeah.
they were dominating the respective market. So let's touch on that briefly, because there's product, and you can have the greatest product in the world, and you know this. Nobody might ever buy it.
Right.
So how do we cross that chasm of when we have generated a great product that we can, what are the tricks or tools today to get it to the masses so people will buy it?
Yeah. Well, so at Rackspace, we worked quite a bit with Jeffrey Moore and his crew, right? So he is the crossing the chasm like author, right? And so we learned some techniques there. I think they're still operative. They're durable concepts, but like the number one thing I call it, back to like construction and building analogies, is finding the live wire of demand. All right. So imagine you got a junction box, hundreds of wires. You're trying to figure out which one lights up. That's your demand stream, if you will. And so I give this advice to small companies all the time. Every time we're evaluating a company for a potential investment, we're looking for the same thing. Do you have doesn't have to be huge, but a set of customers that love you, that whatever it is you do for them is like 100 times better than the next option. All right. So it's not 10% better. It's like 100 times better, maybe 10 times. It just needs to be a multiple better, because people are not really incented to change. The sort of early adopters, this is a Jeffrey Moore quote. So there are early adopters. Everyone talks like an early adopter. Oh, I'm an innovator and I want to, use the new technology, and I'm going to drive everything forward. I'm going to be a leader. Everyone says that, but only like maybe 5% of people actually are crazy enough to be early adopters. The rest are early adopters in drag. Was kind of the quote. So an actual early adopter is usually someone who's maybe just a little bit off their rocker. They're probably very aggressive from a career standpoint, and they're going to drive change in their organization, and they're probably not going to be there in 3 years, right? That's an early adopter. And so what you do is the cross the chasm strategy is you find a customer set that loves you. You get 3 or 4 early adopters. You have to be really fine tooth comb, find them and get them using it. And then you just trumpet that like crazy. Like you make it sound like to all the other non-early adopter, more conservative purchasers that, hey, this product's being used by everybody, right? And you kind of have to pick a small enough target so that with not a crazy amount of money, you can dominate that one market. And once you've got one market dominated, they have this idea of this, bowling pin kind of strategy. In my experience, you don't ever do like this rational bowling pin kind of thing. You get one market to work and then it's off to the races, and you just try to keep exploiting, new opportunities as you find them, but it's not very organized. So, but that first step is really critical. So you got to find a small group. We look at companies a lot where they're like an inch deep and a mile wide. That's not what we want. We want the company that's like a mile deep in one specific type of use case, and they're dominating it. And then we can figure out adjacencies and go take that. So that's the opportunity. That's how you get across the chasm. That's how you get growth going. And look, some people just get lucky. They launch the product, it just takes off. Like that can happen, but that's most of the time not what happens. So you really have to be a little bit more organized about it. And this is an area where I don't think you need sophisticated statistics to figure it out. Like once you find a customer that really likes what you do, it's a pretty gross level of like signal. You're like, oh my God, that is working great. Let's just do more of that. So, and it's not that organized. Like Rackspace, we differentiated on what we called fanatical support. Well, that was almost an accident. Rackspace was pissing off so many of their customers that were having these like, call it ticket-a-thons, where they're just solving customer tickets, and executives, everybody were all in a room working on this stuff. And finally somebody stands up and we can't keep doing this. We got to get fanatical in our support. And then that was like, became the tagline, the rallying cry, the differentiation, the whole mission of the company. Nobody sitting in a room with Jeffrey Moore, MBA, whatever. It was just like, it's just like when you're up against the wall, that's where the best strategy comes from, if you ask me.
That's right. That's right.
So a lot of people are going to be up against the wall in the next few years. I mean, the AI wave is here. So, let's see who figures it out.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of winners and losers for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting, Blue ocean strategy, to me, it's all red right now. I mean, it's, there's going to be so much blood that's in the ocean, and it's like, oh, we've escaped. It's like, no, you haven't, because there's so many different ways that you could be attacked. And it's like, you got to go after it, and you can't quit. And
that's how, I mean, our investment strategy has changed from kind of, before we always wanted companies with data science kind of backbone, but we were more about just like operational support in a fairly traditional building model. And now we're kind of shifting that. We're like, man, we want to get companies that almost don't even have a go-to-market function established, and we want to just build it from the bottom up using AI. I think it's much better to start with the new model than to try to reverse or revision, kind of an ongoing operation with a bunch of people who are all entrenched in the old way.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's well said. Okay. Gonna wrap up here. A couple questions. We're just gonna and we'll do kind of like fire type.
Okay.
A quick.
I'll keep them short.
Yeah. So, how do you measure success with your clients, if you may, or your investments that you make? How do you do that today?
Well, I mean, for sure, we use traditional, metrics. So, financial metrics for our LPs. But I think we're also looking at like how many people are we impacting, and meaning through our companies and their customers, and through those customers' users. Like, what is the usage? How many people's lives have you kind of made better? Sounds corny, but is actually a motivation that we have.
Hey, no, I love it. I think it's we do the same thing here. I mean, yes, there's money metrics that we're trying to hit, but at the end of the day, we're trying to impact business owners and respectively their companies and respectively their employees and respectively their consumers, right? That are buying their products. And through that aspect is how that's what it gets me out of bed each day, right? That keeps me motivated, help get towards there. So I think those
you need some higher order, kind of thing to help you get that, because so much of value is created like with discretionary effort at the edge. You don't get that unless people believe in something.
Yeah. So this is more of a curious question. I'm going to ask it differently than I typically do with most people.
Sure.
Because I usually ask like habits and what you're doing, et cetera. I'm going to ask something a little more specific. If you were to recommend to a small business owner how they should keep up with AI and the changes that are happening, what would you tell them to do?
Well, I think it's a mindset. I think you have to just start using it in all facets of your life. So it's not like you look at AI when you go to work and somebody, I'm joking, prints out a report for you. It's better if you just make it a part of your life. And, luckily a lot of the tools that are out there today are easy enough to use, for an average consumer. You don't need a ton of technical expertise or anything like that. So just integrate it into your life. It's because it has to be something that you feel as much as like you rationally analyze. And then I think that's where the creativity kind of comes from. So that'd be the simplest kind of like AI first in all parts of your life. Like we just went on a long vacation. I mean, I was using ChatGPT like every day, to figure out the day and what we were doing and where to go and where not to go. And you can load in places you've already been. So it deselects those and gives you new places that are like the old. I mean, there's so many ways to use it just in your day-to-day life that I think business leaders just need to integrate it. They don't need to say, oh, I'm just getting going. It's like, no, man, you have to actually be an early adopter of this, even if you don't want to.
Okay. One more follow-on question to that. If you've been using ChatGPT to do all your searches, you're no longer using Google, or less, you're using Google less. So what's the implication for that from a marketing sales perspective for companies that are out there? What do they have to do differently than perhaps just buy Google ads?
Well, so it's interesting. I do use Google. I just use it in a different stage, right? So I might do my first search with ChatGPT, first few, prompts just with ChatGPT to kind of get my plan going. And then unfortunately, it's not always accurate. It'll recommend a restaurant that's in the other side of the nation or whatever. So then you use Google to figure out hours and, all the other kind of like tactical details, if you will. And then I use Reddit if I don't trust what I'm getting from either of those. You can go to Reddit and, basically get like the man on the street's opinion on any given topic. And there are other versions of Reddit type things that you can search as well. So what I found is my search has gotten a lot more heterogeneous. It's like I use a bunch of different search tools now, whereas I used to just use Google. So I think that sharding or, variation is important for marketing. It's like, yeah, you probably need to, I would say buying AdWords is still a part of a, balanced breakfast, but you've got to get other stories out there. And I say stories, I mean, like, the more you can be authoritative on a topic, the better. And I always tell this to salespeople, and I think it's basically good for sales. It's good for marketing. It's good for the CEO and their pitching. It's good for, it goes back to that same idea of helping people. Is like, if you're going to go into a sales conversation with a prospect, you don't want to tell them about your company. You want to explain the world a little bit and help them solve whatever problem they're trying to solve that's kind of in your zone. And then at the end of the meeting, they're like, hey, you taught me something. If I decide I need to use a vendor for this, I'm going to go with you guys because you taught me something. Well, that should be true for any of your marketing content. It's like, yeah, you got to have promotions and other things to, get people off their butt to do something, but teach people, be helpful. Like that's a pretty good idea for a company's positioning. And so if you can, every time you interact with this company, you learn something, you teach something over time, that's going to emanate up into the LLMs because it'll be the content that everybody's reading anyway. And so you'll kind of show up that way. I haven't figured out, if anybody has, it'd be interesting, how you can get your company's name into the ChatGPT results, but I think they are probably training on that. And so I don't think it happens, but at some point they will monetize that. They have to. So, it'll be there. And then again, the fast adopters will exploit that channel. But most channels, like they get their opportunity for a year or two, and then they get kind of, bid up to like, kind of a level that everybody can sustain. Those are never long-term strategies. I think the long-term strategy is all about like telling your story better, and helping people.
Good. One book you recommend, particular about the changes or, current state and where to go.
So this is kind of funny. So my daughter had to read The Old Man of the Sea. She's middle school, going into high school, is like on the reading list for the summer. So I reread it. Last time was probably around her age, right? So you think it does, what does it apply to? It's a guy fishing, catching a big old fish or whatever. But it has a lot in it about what is the purpose of man. It's really man fighting against nature, but there's sort of like a lot of purpose. He's got a lot of time on the boat, right? He's waiting, fish is pulling him along, whatever, and so he's got a lot of time to think. But what are we about? Like, what is our role in the world? And it's like we've always felt like we are the master, like like handed down from God. We're the master, and we should be taming nature. But I think we're gonna have to take a little bit of a different approach because these tools are getting so powerful now that we're gonna have to. I don't know if it's a peer or how you think about it, but it's like it's something much more powerful than we've dealt with before in terms of technology. And our role in the world is going to change. Like we're no longer necessarily the master. It's going to have to be some symbiotic relationship, I guess. I don't really know how this is going to play out, but like that book, oddly to me, opened up a bunch of questions in my own mind about like, what is the role of mankind today? And maybe the fish is the AI, but I don't know. That might be a stretch in it, but still the idea is like, what are we about? And then another book I'll take too is just go read Sapiens again, because it's a pretty good like history of mankind sort of book. And so it gives you a lot of like context as we think about this new era that we're in.
How can people connect and learn more about what you're doing?
Well, so we have a website, buildgroup.com. Now, I will note, we call ourselves Build Group because we like to build companies. There is also a Build Group that builds actual things, buildings. And so we're not that one. I think it's based in Australia. They're great people. We get a lot of their email. But yeah, we're Build Group, the kind of the tech firm, and we're based in Austin. And there's ways to connect with us. And I'm also reachable on LinkedIn and everything too.
Klee, thank you so much for being part of the Measure Success podcast today.
All right, man. Thank you, Carl. I really appreciate it. It was super fun.
And everyone else who's listening, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I love talking with people like Klee, who is in the leading edge of working with AI companies on developing what's happening. Take this information, start acting, folks. This is here. Stay on top of the tsunami. Don't get buried in it. And once again, the lessons that Klee talked about today, I think are some really good things to think about. As we like to say, wishing you the very best at measuring your success. Have a great day.